Next item on the agenda under financial business, fiscal projection 1, fiscal year 2026 initial budget recommendation. Mr. Mizikar, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Sammy. I'm pleased this evening to lead off the discussion about the fiscal year 2026 operating budget, and we'll focus this evening on municipal operations, including shared services, general municipal operation, and then utilities. And I'll be joined this evening by Assistant to Town Manager Alex Martinez and Assistant Town Manager for Administration and Finance David Snowden. I'll start by thanking both of them for all the work that they've put into this budget document. I think over the years we've seen a steady improvement, adding additional context and narrative to really paint a picture of the budget, which we hope to further do this evening. And of course, with our fiscal year 25 budget submission and everyone's diligence, we had received the Government Finance Officers Association Distinguished Budget Presentation Award, which is just the testament from an outside entity that all the work that we've put into this budget is really painting that picture and providing a better insight to how we spend our money on an annual basis. And so we'll talk about those proposals this evening, and then we'll end the presentation before we engage in discussion about how residents can be engaged in the budget process and what opportunities they may take throughout the course of the next few months in advance of town meeting, and then obviously culminating a town meeting in the middle of May. So if you could advance the slide, please. Oh, Alex has it. Start at the beginning. Awesome. Yeah. Perfect. So this is what we're going to walk you through. We want to take a little bit of opportunity to look at some accomplishments from the last few years, paint a picture of what we've been working on and what this budget will continue to drive us towards. We'll recap some of the financial pillars that were set by this board with the adoption of the 2021 override. We're going to take a step back and look at how Shrewsbury, as a local government, provides value to residents by comparing some financial data to some of our comparable communities to show where we stand with them. We'll look at the priorities that were set at the outset of the budget. We'll get into the revenues and then, of course, the operating budget itself. Next slide. So where I want to start is taking just a moment to reflect on the progress that we've made and talk a little bit about where we're heading. Our progress certainly is not a result of any isolated initiative. Instead, it comes from a system of interconnected components. And there's three that I want to talk about this evening: the strategic plan, the work that we've been doing internally to transform how we operate on a day-to-day basis, and then the fiscal stability that kind of underpins and also is a result of the strategic plan and internal transformation. We certainly feel that we've built meaningful outcomes and experienced and achieved those through those three interconnected components. Each one of them strengthens and depends on each other, and I feel that we're able to illustrate some meaningful results. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these. I'm not going to be able to go through an exhaustive list of all the accomplishments that we've had over the recent years, but hopefully we can paint a good picture of where we're going. So, Alex, if you could advance. So I have up on the screen the 5 strategic outcome areas, starting at the top: engaged and connected, exceptional, thriving, prosperous, and finally sustainable. So our strategic plan clearly provides direction to us, aligning our day-to-day efforts with our long-term goals. It ensures that our resources are effectively allocated, fostering a citizen-centric approach and driving continuous improvement. Our plan is not something that just sits on the shelf. We actively pursue the vision each and every day. And additionally, I'm really happy that we're nearing the publication of a performance dashboard that will really put metrics to these accomplishments and be updated in real time. Later this spring, it'll be published. So when I look at some of those areas, just to touch upon them, so many opportunities that we've built engagement and connection, and I think second to none is just the establishment of our communications program through a communications strategic plan, and really doing more to not only inform but engage with the public. And all these things are a continued work in progress. Communications is one of them. When it comes to exceptional, this is more back of the house operations. We've worked really hard to bring fiscal stability to the town. We have a balanced budget projection that we'll work through the numbers on through fiscal year 28. We have a housing production plan that was recently updated. And we've made over $65 million in infrastructure investments. We've secured funds for those just since 2023. So we continue to invest in ourselves and invest in the community. In our recreation program, we've vastly expanded opportunities, including new offerings through a regional partnership to make sure everyone has an opportunity to participate. We've enhanced our community events. We still pursue activities and bring new programming to the community through our DEIB initiatives. We have incredible achievements still under Shrewsbury Public Schools. And we've been able to really increase public safety staffing and community engagement through public safety, which is a critical component to people's feeling of safety and connectedness within the community. Since 2020, we've seen tremendous growth in the community, most importantly, growth within our commercial, industrial, and personal property sectors. For the last 2 years in a row, we've experienced commercial property growth exceeding residential. Not only is that the first 2 consecutive years in the last 25 years, but it's also only the third time in the last 25 years that we've experienced greater commercial growth in it than residential growth, which of course is something that this board has asked us to do. The strategic plan has focused us on, and something that we think about on a day-to-day basis. And since 2020, we've created a department of planning and economic development. So where we put our resources, just like communications, we are seeing results in planning and economic development. And finally, within our sustainable category, climate action and resilience plan has been put in place. We've acquired 6 acres of land and permanently preserved it, and we've established our own local wetland protection bylaw. So the strategic plan is obviously doing what it's intended to do. We took community feedback. We continue to engage with the community and put resources in place to drive services in those prioritized areas.
Mr. Mizikar,
Sure.
if I may interrupt quickly. I just want to remind the community that in addition to the 6 acres of land that were acquired and permanently preserved, we also preserved the remainder of Prospect Park after the Phase 1, what was called Phase 1 of the Mountain View Cemetery expansion. The remainder of Prospect Park is preserved in perpetuity now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, absolutely. Alex, if you can go ahead. So internal things. I know folks don't get to see this work as much, but while the strategic plan defines our long-term vision, it's really our internal transformation. What I'm talking about is really digitizing processes, restructuring operations, and the adoption of a performance-based culture that operationalizes the vision and what's set forth in the strategic plan. Together, they ensure that the strategic priorities translate into efficient, high-quality services for residents. Our internal changes that we've made have made the organization more adaptable and efficient, enabling us to allocate resources strategically. And this sustains our financial stability, which in turn allows us to further invest in mission-driven services. And this is something that we need to continue to focus on. We made it a priority in my upcoming 12-week segment of goals, and I look forward to talking a little bit more about this as how it ties into the budget when we talk about the highlights for FY26. So let me just talk about a couple things. We've gone through a significant transformation when it comes to how we incentivize and award employees. We move from a tenure-based system to a performance-based system that aligns incentives with the strategic priorities of not only the strategic plan, but those are broken down into departmental goals and individual goals. We've empowered employees through that same plan with clear performance expectations and strategic goals, ensuring that every role contributes to the broader vision for the community. We focus on leadership development, bringing leadership capacity, ensuring managers are equipped to drive the strategic priorities. We've modernized employee incentives and benefits, including being the first municipality in Massachusetts to adopt paid family medical leave. And we've also focused on major improvements to our enterprise resource planning system and customer relationship management system. So these are two software-based systems that really drives the internal operations of our organization, our core business processes. And through the work, once we put resources in place, with the leadership of Julie Tierney, we've really optimized our use and see greater opportunity without additional investment to leverage those systems to be more efficient internally. I've put up some statistics on our CRM enhancements. So our CRM tool is called OpenGov, and it's really our front door for residents to engage in services, whether that's a building permit or a dog license or anything in between. And you can really see through a couple of these line items. I'll start with the number of departments that were utilizing our CRM. It was really brought on board as kind of a building permit system, and it's evolved to each and every department having some component public-facing interaction on it. Number of records created, that is the number of forms that we use to provide services to residents, has more than doubled from 6,000 to 14,000. Our revenues have almost doubled in collections. The number of inspections that are documented and permanently managed and maintained in this system is approaching over 80% and greater than it was. And of course, the number of permits that we've issued because we've brought more of those opportunities online has almost doubled as well. So a lot of work to, evolve our digital transformation as an organization without additional investment in those systems. Is actually just putting the resources in place to further allow us to utilize them. We've actually reduced our software footprint and have achieved these great outcomes. Alex, if you can go ahead. With regards to fiscal stability, we're going to talk about that through and through the budget presentation, but I think it's important for us to always go back at this time to talk about the pillars of our financial system. We all know financial stability is more than just a balanced budget. It's our capacity to invest in future growth. And because we really took so much effort in 2021 to build a good foundation, we've still been able to fund strategic initiatives despite putting expenditure caps in place and really saving dollars for the future and living within our means. So those commitments that we made to the community are affirmed and exercised through this budget, and we continue to provide fiscal discipline. We're well below the expenditure caps that have been allotted. Those maximum expenditure caps are not even approached by the budget levels that we're proposing. We certainly are missing out on opportunities when you look at what departments have requested versus what we're able to fund, but we have to deal with the revenue streams that we have, and we're offering a balanced budget through this. We continue to look every way that we can to minimize impact on taxpayers. Those specific commitments that the select board set forth for municipal operations on annual expenditures are met through this budget. Same with the initial proposal from Dr. Sawyer, and that all allows us to maintain a strong fiscal condition. Alex, if you can move forward. So this is the look ahead for our financial picture. And I know there's a lot of data on the screen, but I just want to key in on a couple of things. So fiscal year 26 is the fifth fiscal year since the adoption of our override. We are proposing to use no funding for the override stabilization account. And for the first time, but for the first time, we're also not planning to contribute any dollars to the override stabilization fund. So the override dollars and resources that we put in place in 21 are fully ingrained in the year-to-year cost of the community. Because we've maintained funding levels, it has provided us a good buffer in our override stabilization account. But if you look at that second line, override stabilization, you do see in fiscal year 27 and 28, we do intend to draw down on that fund, as has been planned the whole time, but this is just much delayed. It will be introduced, drawing down in the 6th year rather than what we actually proposed was the 3rd year. So you can see that we're also projecting a balanced budget through fiscal year 28. So 7 years after the initial override, we're still projecting a balanced budget. Fiscal year 29, we're showing, at least at this point, a deficit. We still use a conservative revenue model. We'll continue to look at that. It's certainly going to be hard to make up. We're really proud that we've gotten 7 and not 4 years. 7 years was the same amount of time that we had out of the previous override. We'll continue to work on that on an annual basis, but this is where we sit today. And I just want to, make one more comment. There have been 114 override questions in other communities for fiscal year 22 and beyond. So since the time that we've asked an override question, there's been 114 other questions asked. So very challenging fiscal times for a municipality. We've benefited from a long-term approach to our override model because there is a significant number of communities that have asked multiple override questions, making up that 114. So it's not 114 different communities, it's 114 times the questions have asked. There's been several communities who have asked override questions at least 2 times during that period. So we took a long-term approach, a stabilizing approach, which has led to not only the outcomes that I was able to just touch upon a little bit, but also really stabilizing the relationship and the environment when it comes to our financial management, partnership with the schools, and ability for departments to plan to achieve the outcomes that we're experiencing. So we'll start to get into the budget a little bit deeper, and I'll turn it over to Alex.
Thank you. So this graph highlights the contributions that have been made into the override stabilization fund since fiscal year 22. As of February 3rd, 2025, the current balance in the override stabilization fund is $9,714,845. Since FY22, there have been 5 contributions occurring at least once annually into this fund. I would like to highlight that within our financial model, our control point is on the expenditure side and not revenues. This has allowed us to build the stabilization fund balance to this level. Some communities identify how much revenue they will have in a given year and spend that much annually. But since the board had the vision to control annual expenditures, this has allowed for excess revenue to go into the override stabilization fund and provide for much more long-term financial stability. It's also important to assess the value that we provide to residents. I will now turn it over to Mr. Snowden to take a look at some data on how Shrewsbury compares to other municipalities on value.
Excellent. Good evening. Over the next couple of slides, Alex and I will walk through some comparable communities data. These are the same 14 communities that we historically look at when we publish the budgets each year, and we have them listed on each screen as a reference. The first data point is population density. Shrewsbury has a population density of approximately 1,876 residents per square mile, which is higher than the peer average of 1,710. This higher density suggests a vibrant, well-established residential community. However, despite the potential for larger commercial base, historically Shrewsbury's revenue model has not heavily leaned on that, as Mr. Mizikar alluded to earlier. In more recent years, we've seen an increase in the commercial revenue growth. All right. Excellent. This chart here is going to be comparing the commercial, industrial, and personal property percentage of the total tax levy for each municipality. This isn't the dollar value, but it's the percentage of those taxes as a part of the total tax levy. In terms of composition of its tax levy, only 18.85% of Shrewsbury's total tax revenue comes from commercial, industrial, and personal property sources, which is well below the peer average of 23.56%. This indicates a deliberate and stable reliance on residential and other sources of revenue, which can insulate the town from volatility often seen in the commercial market. It should, and this is reflective of what we've had historically within the town over the years. Next slide, please. Here, we are looking at the tax levy per capita, FY25 tax levy per capita across these municipalities. The town's FY25 tax levy per capita is $2,877, significantly lower than the peer average of $3,556. This lower tax levy per capita reflects Shrewsbury's commitment in keeping the overall tax burden manageable for its residents. Go to the next. Thank you. Complementing the previous slide, we're now going to look at the general fund expenditures as it relates to the per capita of the municipality. So this is FY24's general fund expenditures as it relates to the per capita information. So Shrewsbury comes in at 3,840, below the peer average of 4,333. Together with the previous slide, this suggests that Shrewsbury is both fiscally disciplined in its spending and effective in generating revenue without overburdening its taxpayers. I'm going to hand it over to Alex now to go over some more of the tax bill impacts as it compares to these other municipalities.
Thank you. So the next 3 slides are going to talk about homeowner tax impact. This first slide depicts the average single-family tax bill as a percentage of Department of Revenue income per capita. In Shrewsbury, this is 11.78%, placing it among the most favorable in the region. Only Woburn has a slightly lower rate at 11.7%, while the peer average is 13.59%. DOR income per capita means the average income per person in a given area, calculated using data from the Department of Revenue in that region, essentially dividing total income reported to DOR by total population of that area. It's a way to measure the average economic well-being of residents based on tax data collected by the Revenue Department. The next slide depicts the residential tax rate by our comparable communities. The residential tax rate in Shrewsbury is $12.04 for FY25. This is just a hair below the peer average of $12.33, further reinforcing its attractive tax environment for homeowners. And also on this chart, the municipalities with asterisks have a split tax rate, just for reference. This next slide depicts the average single-family tax bill. In absolute terms, the FY25 single-family tax bill in Shrewsbury is $8,511. This is marginally below the peer average of $8,788. Although this figure is higher than the state average of $7,507, it aligns with Shrewsbury's overall regional competitiveness. Taken together, we believe Shrewsbury is a community that has struck a careful balance of revenue stability by historically maintaining a lower reliance on commercial taxes. Shrewsbury ensures that its revenue stream remains stable and less subject to market fluctuations. As far as a competitive tax burden, lower per capita tax levies and a modest single-family tax burden enhance the town's appeal for both residents and potential new homeowners. And lastly, efficient public spending. With general fund expenditures per capita also below the peer average, Shrewsbury demonstrates fiscal discipline that supports efficient service delivery without excess. The town's ability to maintain lower tax burdens while delivering essential services offers a compelling example of balanced municipal management, one that prioritizes stability, efficiency, and community appeal. So this completes our analysis of our comparable communities, and I will now turn it over to Dave to review FY26 priorities as they relate to the strategic plan.
Excellent. This slide has a lot on it, and thankfully Mr. Mizikar has already gone over a great deal of the strategic plan and how it plays in the development of a budget each year. Again, departments have been instructed and motivated to tie their budget approach and goals to the strategic areas of engaged and connected, exceptional, thriving, prosperous, and sustainable. We'll try to continue using that similar language throughout this presentation to help the viewers and the board themselves understand where the budget ties to those specific priorities.
All right, so now we will dive into revenue. So this slide provides an overview of revenue summary for fiscal projection 1. Total revenue for FY26 is projected at $186,538,908. This is a decrease of $4,022,020, or 2.11% from the FY25. I would like to note that within the other available funds category, current revenue projections do not include Community Preservation Committee project funds or other unanticipated warrant articles or article closeouts that will be further developed in fiscal projection 2 as we begin to work and develop the annual town meeting warrant. So on this slide, I will just highlight the difference of fiscal projection 1 compared to the FY25 budget on the level of our revenue categories. So the tax levy is projected to increase about $3.35 million. This is reflective of the Proposition 2.5 increase allowed on the base tax levy, which totals $2,565,240. And new growth is estimated at $1,350,000. The next category, state aid. This is an increase of $573,067, and these figures are based on the initial state budget that was filed by the governor at the end of January. The next category is utility revenue, and this is utility revenue across all 4 utility funds. This is projected to decrease by $3,493,819. Utility fund revenues are based on currently anticipated needs to operate the enterprises, and these decreases are primarily a reflection of multi-year capital improvement plan funding models and multi-year funding in FY25 for larger significant projects, so less funds are needed in FY26. The next category is local receipts, and the estimated increase is $1,405,328. And back in the fall, as discussed when we reviewed the FY26 revenue manual, local receipts have performed exceptionally well over the past few fiscal years and have far exceeded budgeted amounts. So FY25 revenues are projected to far exceed the FY25 budgeted amount of $15.58 million, and based on these historical trending analysis, we feel comfortable with this increase in local receipts. The next category is free cash. This is a reduction of $2,514,605. The free cash estimate is the planned use of free cash to support annual warrant articles and the FY26 capital improvement plan. I'd like to note that in FY25, free cash figures represented allocations approved at the May annual town meeting and the November special town meeting. And this included things like $2.1 million in funding general stabilization and about $1.3 million to fund the municipal facilities optimization project. The next category is the reduced levy, and this reduction is based on no longer receiving a pilot payment for IT services from Selco. The town and Selco have developed a managed service agreement which reflects more accurate costs of IT services for the town, which is reflected in the operating budget. And lastly, other available funds is a reduction of $3,184,758, and as I mentioned before, this is based on not having figures for CPC projects and article closeouts. So this figure will be closely monitored and revised as the town meeting warrant is developed. And I will now turn it over to Dave to review fiscal projection 1 expenditures.
Thank you. All right. So on this slide, we have a pie chart that represents the expenditure breakouts across the categories I'll go through, and then we also have it in a table as well. FY26 expenditures are projected to total $186,638,908 across all funds, which is $4,022,020, or 2.11% less than the expenditures planned from the current fiscal year 25. The operating budget for municipal and educational expenses, shared operating support, and debt service totals $160,991,569. Capital improvements are projected at $2 million. Offsets and charges are projected at $1,540,142. And currently anticipated program and project funding through warrant articles is projected to be total about $2,197,675, of which $300,000 will be transferred to the general stabilization fund, which the town now has at policy level, and this will help us to retain policy level within FY26. Expenditures for all municipal departments, including utilities and the school department, total $180,101,957, which is a 1.19% increase over FY25. Direct utility operating expenditures, including water, sewer, solid waste, and stormwater, are proposed at $19,110,388, which is a decrease of about $3.8 million from fiscal year 25. So now we can look at these expenditures as they apply to functional areas across the operating budget. The functional areas for the town and school are administration and finance, public safety, community development, retirement, DPW general fund, human services, debt service, education, and then shared operating support. Shared operating support, as we go into detail, you'll see retirement is included in there, but historically we've had retirement out, and we'll go over that. And you can see the percentage increases all the way on the left. A 2% for admin and finance, and maybe the largest is the community development, and we'll go into greater detail with those strategic initiatives a little bit later on.
So provide some highlights before we get into the individual departmental budgets. In total, municipal department expenditures have been held at 3.46% increase. And this is a net result of about $1.2 million in new municipal expenditures. So we're a heavy, like all local governments, we're a heavy salary and wage expenditure organization. About 78% of the new funding is allocated to salary and wages, despite the fact that we're only proposing one additional full-time equivalent year over year. There's about, the balance is going into additional operating expenses. And again, because of the size and the nature of the type of operations, over a third of the funding is being allocated, over a third of the total funding is being allocated within the public safety areas of police and fire for wage increases. Just managing those organizations going forward, so critical to the community and expensive. So this was a tough fiscal year. There's not a lot of new initiatives. We are working to continue to be as efficient as possible, and that's where our focus is going to be for next fiscal year. That will allow us to continue to mitigate future costs and make the investments that we can year over year with the new funding. One of the things that's also challenging the budget is that we have been rolling off utilization of one-time funding sources, which gave us a jump start on hiring some folks. So we're no longer afforded the opportunity to use American Rescue Plan Act funds. So you can see about just over halfway down that about 2.1 full-time equivalents are now being funded through the general operating budget that were funded outside of it. So that's taken up about $240,000 in total new expenditures. So while there's not a whole lot new from additional FTEs or services directly coming in, the budget is absorbing additional costs, again, about $240,000. So we're moving that into, sustainable long-term operations, getting it into the core of the operating budget that's funded through recurring revenues like we need to at this time, and which we've been planning to do since we instituted and, leveraged these outside funding sources This has always been the plan. So, as I mentioned, there's one new full-time equivalent proposed within the Human Resources Department, a professional and technical position that will enable some broader work to be done within the department and hopefully leveraged into continuing to drive some internal transformation and shared service partnerships. Alex, can you go to the next slide? So kind of envisioning the future, that was my fourth point at the beginning. So what are we going to do? We have limited funds, but we have set aside $250,000 to request for really jumpstarting and continuing a couple initiatives that we have. So we know it's really important to continue to improve our operations along the terms of digital transformation. So when business processes are done on a manual basis, those costs, it becomes really expensive, right? The human resources cost versus leveraging technology and economies of scale is much more expensive. So we need to continue to drive things into basically a more horizontally situated business processes throughout our organization. So think of things like payroll, accounts payable. Those are really vertically aligned within departments now. We need to continue to draw those out of individual departments, centralize them and digitize them to reduce the amount of human touches and human capacity that's needed to perform those operations. So when we think about external partnerships, I feel we have a true opportunity to continue to leverage existing external partnerships and revisit some other areas that other municipalities operate through partnerships. So we currently have shared service arrangements through a number of core services, including public health and veterans. We want to explore what the best operating models are in other areas, including public safety, as we bring on emergency medical services. There's a lot of back office business processes administration that other communities are already doing. How do we leverage those relationships? You know, what is the best approach for consolidating and unifying our emergency communications? So we just want to continue to look at how we provide not only front office core business operations directly to residents, but the back office business operations that consume resources that could be redirected to other mission opportunities, driving the needs that have been identified through the strategic plan and providing more services to residents through those processes. So limited opportunities to do new things in the budget. There's still, I think a silver lining behind this that we can re-entrench and look at how we can become a better operating organization while maintaining service levels. We will be maintaining service levels through this proposal, and that's something that not a lot of communities are able to say as they begin their FY26 budget process, and again, is a testament to the fiscal stability that this board has set forth through your override commitments that you made in 2021. So I'll turn it back over to Dave.
All right. As we continue forward, I wanted to spend a little time to identify the total amount of unfunded requests across all departments. The amount came in at about 1.77 million. And it's important because these requests also reflect the items and approaches that each department believes could best tie to the strategic plan within their office. Ideally, we'd want to fund all these, but we're not able to every year. And again, it is spread across. This includes salary and wages, which Alex will go over next, and operating expenses as well.
All right, so this section reflects new FTE requests that were requested by town departments, but were unable to be funded in the FY26 budget. So in total, 13.5 FTEs were requested across 10 departments, and this includes a variety of full and part-time positions. The total value of these FTE requests is $1,037,757, and as Dave mentioned, is part of the bottom line total reduction that was highlighted on the previous slide. Over the next few slides, we will now transition into reviewing fiscal projection 1 budget figures at the functional and department area level.
All right. Here we have administration and finance, sorry. For the sake of being able to view everything, we've broken out the shared operating costs, which will be on the next slide. And Alex will go into greater detail there. I did want to highlight a couple items that Mr. Mizikar has already gone over. The $376,000 in the town manager line item, that does include the $250,000 funding initiative for the enterprise performance and optimization project. And then HR, which would probably be one of the other departments with a higher dollar difference, $98,000, that does include the new FTE. Some of the departments that have some reductions, like elections and registration, this reflects the normal swaying in the election cycle each year. And then everything else is more of a level service budget at that point.
All right, so next we'll go over shared operating support. And shared operating support are operating expenses that are shared between all town departments and the school department. This includes the employee assistance program, employee health insurance, Medicare costs, unemployment compensation, and general insurance coverage. Shared operating support is projected to increase $1,390,500 over FY25. And as you can see, the most significant increase is within the health insurance line. This increase is based on anticipated enrollment figures and projected premium rates. I'd like to point out that within the FY26 budget, there are a couple new line items that are being brought under the shared operating support umbrella that have previously existed outside of shared operating support. The most significant expenditure line cost-wise is retirement, which consists of the town's pension and annuities obligations, and OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits. These two lines have a total proposed budget of $2.6 million. And the reason why is in FY26, we've taken a closer look at the original allocations within the override model that were allocated to shared operating support and have realigned those categories by bringing them into shared operating support as they are truly shared costs across town and school departments.
Excellent. So now we'll look at the functional area of public safety, which includes police, fire, and emergency management. Earlier we talked about the total revenue and the change of fiscal 25 to 26. And while public safety is a large part of that, this represents almost a level service budget. And it's probably one of the smaller dollar increases we've seen year over year for these departments. Fire actually has one reallocated employee from ARPA funding to the fire general fund, and then there are no additional employees at this point in time projected in the police budget as well.
Moving into the Department of Public Works within the general fund, these departments consist of Public Works Administration, Public Buildings, Weights and Measures, Forestry, Engineering, Fleet Maintenance, Highway, Street Lighting, Cemetery, and Parks Maintenance. The four utility funds, water, sewer, stormwater, and solid waste, are not included in this section and will be reviewed later. So overall, the DPW functional area is projected to increase $398,410, or 3.96% over FY25. The most significant increase within this functional area is within public buildings. That increase is $237,000. And this increase is tied to contractual salary obligations for union employees, increases to natural gas costs, and increased cost of supplies and goods to maintain public buildings, as well as the cleaning contract for the high school is expiring on June 30th, 2025, so that contract will need to go out to bid.
All right. Community development, which includes the Conservation Commission, Planning Board, Board of Appeals, Building Inspector Office, and the Planning and Economic Development. Earlier when we were talking about the functional areas, this was one of the areas that I mentioned had one of the larger percentage increases. It's on the order of about 32% increase, and that's associated with the funding increase of about $226,000 within the Planning and Economic Development Department. This increase is most significantly tied to the funding of two major projects, the Master Plan and the Climate Action Plan. In Massachusetts, a master plan is required to be a comprehensive townwide plan that contains the following elements: land use, natural and cultural resources, open space and recreation, economic development, housing, public facilities and services, transportation, and implementation. The town's master plan was last updated in 2016, and it's recommended that this policy document be updated and reviewed every 10 years. Additionally, the funding for the Climate Action Plan will fund consulting services to continue moving the town in the direction of meeting its sustainability goals. Excluding these two projects, the department has a net reduction of approximately $20,000, which is related to the Assistant Planning and Economic Development Director position being partially funded with ARPA funds for 26, and then some of it coming into the general fund in 27.
The next functional area is human services, and the departments within this functional area are the Health Department, the Council on Aging, Veterans Services, the Commission on Disabilities, the Library, and the Recreation Department. This functional area is projected to increase $177,323, or 6.14%. Significant increases within these departments include $45,000 in internet costs to be captured in the library budget, 25% of funding for one FTE within the library, which was mentioned earlier, and the shifting of 50% of funding for one of the recreation program coordinators from the Recreation Revolving Fund to the general fund. So all positions within the Recreation Department will now, all full-time positions within the Recreation Department will now be funded through the general fund. And additionally, within Recreation, there's some increased costs for programming and supplies to help the Recreation Department transition to the Ray Stone Post building at 835 Main Street.
Excellent. So wrapping up the last parts of the general fund items, we'll look at debt and interest, and then Alex and I will go over the utilities. First, we'll look at the principal debt. This year reflects a decrease of principal of about $68,637. It includes new payments for the water capital improvement plan for years 2023 and 2024, where town meeting approved a multi-year borrowing process. This combined with the next page, which will, if you want to go to that one now, Alex, which is the interest. Ultimately, there is a reduction of $637,075 from the tax levy that is being reduced as the debt is rolling off from these figures here. And again, you can see the interest that's associated to the previous pages. Principal, again, like the water capital projects. Yeah, and then now that we're wrapping up the general fund portion, our initial estimates for FY26 are projecting to see about a $320 increase to the average single-family tax bill, which is about a 3.75% increase for FY26. These are preliminary numbers using our 5-year average for personal property and growth and the single-family home growth. Our estimates were pretty close in the previous year, but it's a helpful snapshot. This does not include any other debt authorization or financing. This is based off the budget we're presenting right now at this point in time.
All right, so to close it out, we will go over the utilities. So the town operates 4 utilities: solid waste, water, sewer, and stormwater. These enterprise funds are held separately from the general fund in order to demonstrate the total cost of services that are recovered through user fees and charges. The solid waste enterprise is currently the only enterprise fund subsidized by the tax levy. In total, the 4 utility funds are budgeted to expend $19,110,388 in FY26. And this figure represents total estimated revenue minus the indirect costs for each enterprise that are captured in the general fund. So the first enterprise fund that we'll look at is solid waste. The solid waste enterprise runs on a pay-as-you-throw model, which was adopted by the town in 2008. This model partially funds solid waste and recycling collection through a fee residents pay for town distributed trash bags. The program's fee structure has been designed to cover approximately 50% of the program's expenses. And in FY '26, it is estimated that the tax levy will support 50.42% of the enterprise. Total revenues less grant funds is projected at $1,815,125. This revenue increase is primarily based on historical higher than budgeted fees that have actually been collected, so this is just kind of right-sizing that line item. And then total charges, including indirects, are projected at $3,661,164. This is an increase of about $326,000, primarily due to contractual costs for the town's hauler, increased costs to improve the thickness of bags, and just a general increased average disposal of tonnage. The next enterprise is the stormwater enterprise. The stormwater enterprise was established to meet unfunded mandates from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. The Stormwater Utility Fund funds the operations to minimize stormwater pollution as outlined in the Stormwater Management Plan. The FY '26 stormwater budget projects revenues totaling $1,888,934. This is a reduction of $2,687,196 from FY '25. All revenues will come from stormwater fees at this point in time, and there's no planned use of retained earnings in the FY '26 budget. Total direct charges are projected at $1,581,541. This includes just over $1 million in operating expenses for salaries and wages. The annual catch basin maintenance contract is about $500,000, and $500,000 in capital investments for ongoing drainage improvements. In FY '25, a 2-year contract was executed for drainage system mapping, totaling about $1.3 million, which covered costs for FY '25 and FY '26, which is the primary driver of the reduction in total expenditures.
All right. On our way to the last two enterprises, first we'll look at the sewer. FY '26 fiscal projection 1 is projecting total direct charges in the amount of $10,087,880. This includes capital investments in the amount of $2,180,000. This is a part of the 5-year financial plan that was adopted by the sewer commissioners. As we get closer to fiscal projection 2, we'll have a better sense of the sewer article closeouts and if there's any projects that we might be able to close out and reallocate funding for in FY '26. Again, this does not include the debt payments for the DPW facilities project. Now moving on to water. This is under the guidance of the water commissioners and also reflects the 5-year financial plan that was adopted with the rate setting for water. Total direct charges for FY '26 amount to $3,863,032. The capital investments within the non-debt funded represent $97,500. The vast majority of the water capital investments are included in those multi-year borrowings, which we touched upon previously. There's been borrowing about $4 million a year for water main, water meters, and tank rehabilitation, and there'll be another borrowing coming up based off of what was already authorized from town meeting later this year. So this is just a little landing page. We can use this as a closeout that summarizes again the expenditures right now for FY '26. We've enjoyed the opportunity, Alex, myself, and Mr. Mizikar, to provide and review the balanced level service budget for fiscal year 2026. Total expend $186,638,908. More than happy to go over anything in greater detail and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Very detailed presentation, a lot of information to digest. Colleagues, questions, comments?
I have a
Michelle, go ahead.
Questions, Mr. Chair. On slide 26, you mentioned a $0.01 million increase in health and life insurance. Is that because of increased enrollment or increased costs?
Both.
Both, okay. All right, I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Where are we, you mentioned that there's a major contract coming up for renegotiation with the high school. Are there any other major contracts or union negotiations anticipated in the next, where are we in the cycle with
So we have,
negotiations?
we have our police contracts. So we have superior officers that are, have a contract just through the end of this fiscal year, patrol officers, and emergency communication dispatchers.
All at the end of this fiscal year?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. So we'll need, it'll be our goal to settle those prior to the end of this fiscal year and congruent with the budget cycle to ensure that we have sufficient resources at the start of the budget process.
Okay. And any major contract negotiations that are coming up that we would see impacting our budget projections?
Not that I'm aware of from a
Yeah.
service standpoint.
The grounds maintenance for the cemetery, that contract does end at the end of this fiscal year. We did get bids back already, and it falls within the budgeted amount for FY26, so.
Thank you.
Are you all set?
Yes, thank you.
I have,
Go
I
ahead,
have some
Carlo.
questions.
Sure.
Kevin, Alex, Dave, thank you for setting the context, for outlining the achievements thus far, and it's a very thorough presentation, so really appreciate that. I guess I have a few questions. First, on the unfunded requests, was curious on how we prioritize those when and if we ever receive either a windfall or for the next fiscal years. How do we prioritize those requests?
Yep.
Moving forward.
There is going to be a balance as well. One of the reasons I think that we've been able to have a strong financial position is that we do have spending caps. So we want to make sure that we're not going to exceed the spending caps in any given year. But depending on the amount of money, I imagine there would be guidance from the select board as well in developing a policy in which items may best meet the strategic plan.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would just underscore that last point, you know, as we look to, you know, what's the next right investment to add into the operating budget, right? So these are ongoing costs. Over $1 million of it is salary, and we know departments are yearning to be able to provide greater services. So as we continue to look to optimize the way we operate, you know, and work with departments to ensure that they can build upon their success, we would just look to leverage the next right investment with where we are at the time. So hopefully that opportunity presents itself in future years.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you. On the revenue side, I think questions that I receive out in the community, I'm sure maybe my colleagues see this too or hear this. I appreciated that you outlined, you know, how we compare with the other communities, especially in terms of our tax rate. I've received questions about, you know, I think people would like to see some information on if we ever were to explore a split tax rate. I'm certainly not advocating for that, but I think just perhaps information on that from our neighboring communities and our comparables, just to see, you know, how that affects their ability to attract and retain commercial. I just wanted to express that because I think that that's information that folks in the community would like to see. And then I think, you know, I appreciate that we, our control point is our expenditures, as you have outlined. Really appreciate that we have prolonged the duration of the override that the community voted for several years ago. Really appreciate that we can extend the life of that. So I commend all the town staff for their work there. As folks begin to learn more about this year's budget cycle, I'm wondering if there's a way for us to have maybe on the homepage of our town site a button or something to get people access to that a lot faster. that they don't have to dig. I think that's it for now.
Okay, thank you. Teresa?
With 15% of our projected revenue being tied to state aid, any concerns or changes, and any percentage of state aid that is federally funded that we need to have a new set of concerns around?
For the last part of it, federally funded, indirect through the state, not that I'm aware of. The core aspects that come in from state aid are state-generated revenues, lottery revenues on the unrestricted general government aid, broad income tax revenues for the education, along with, the Fair Share Amendment, which is funding the Student Opportunity Act, again, for, I think this is the third year. So I don't think there's a lot of risk in there. I think the federal dollars flow in more on the grant side of things that we need to keep our eye on, indirectly through the state and then to us on those one-time revenue sources. I feel that from what I get to hear from the monthly meetings I participate in, with how state revenues are performing, they are performing above benchmark this year, which is great. They weren't there last year. They're not, drastically above, but they are at least meeting benchmark. I know January was a really solid month of tax income. So there's less concerns with the fiscal stability at the state level as far as what's generated here in Massachusetts. So the governor's proposal on education aid is far and above what any other governor has proposed, which, as you can see, is really driving the vast majority of that $500,000 increase in state aid. The saying has always gone, whatever the governor proposes, the legislature through the House and Senate normally outdoes when it comes to state aid. So that may not be the case this year, since the governor set the budget mark pretty high, but hopefully they at least affirm that. But that's kind of our biggest risk category, is the $70 per pupil in additional education aid that's provided. I think that's the number.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Mizik, or Mr. Snowden, or anyone, what % of the shared operating expenses are school versus municipal, roughly?
Roughly 70-30 across the board. Yeah.
I just want to pause. I agree with Mr. Garcia. We hear a lot from residents, and I think that we hear a lot about inflation and cost increases and not wanting more expenses. And I think we're trying everything we can to do that. And I do think that when, you sit in this role, you kind of see what happens in other towns and cities, and you see how they sort of add expenses with one-time funding sources, and then they create this deficit, or they're asking for overrides more frequently. And I do think that we have been very careful to take any excess revenue due to growth, and we have put it in the stabilization fund to really extend, the period of time where we would have to ask for a more material increase. And I'm not just touting our horn, but I do think that, people think, we hear anecdotally sometimes, like, the town just spends money carelessly, and it's really important to go through this process, to go through department by department. And, at a high level, if we were to look at education versus municipal, it's almost like a 50-50 split. But then when you consider that about 70% of those shared expenses are schools, the schools alone are about 57% of our total, $187 million budget. So at least 43% of that, about $80 million, for police and fire and DPW and resident services, the assessor, the town clerk, the inspector, planning, economic development, et cetera, et cetera. So I really think that, we're trying to squeeze as much as possible while maintaining core services that people in this town both need and expect. So I really, kind of putting that call out to all residents, you know, we go through this every year, we lay it all out. If you have questions, if you think that things could be different, better, if you wonder where the money's going, like, it is all here. Hopefully it's transparent, but if you have questions, we know that there will be the finance hearings that are coming up, and certainly for town meeting members who will get all of, you know, the detailed information as well. But I'll get off my soapbox, but I just think it's important to, you know, to recognize that this now is the opportunity to really understand where your tax dollars are going.
You know, one thing about education, if you look at our state aid line, we were held harmless in 2008, 2009 during the Great Recession, but the state has made us play catch-up ever since, and that's what we're going to continue to do. So we're going to give minimum state aid probably in perpetuity, given our economics. So that is another challenge that we have, because by design, under the statute, it is pushing more of the funding to our budget. So that is, we've known that. That is something that is not unique to Shrewsbury, but if you do look at our Chapter 70 funding relative to adjacent communities, we do extraordinarily well. When we were a high-growth district during the initial funding when ed reform happened, and they haven't pulled it back since then, but that's not going to be a release valve for us anytime soon, so that's something we're going to continue to have to figure out with our tax dollars. A few comments that commercial and industrial, you know, I appreciate the comment that not relying too much on it, that did hedge against volatility, but the question that we're going to have to answer is, what's that healthy balance? The last 2 years and 3 times out of 25 years, we saw commercial and industrial growing faster than residential, and because we're a largely residential community, this was the first time where year-over-year increase for tax bills wasn't, you know, was 3%, give or take, right? So that is the question we've touted a lot about. One of our goals is planning and economic development, and to look at that carefully, that we don't get to that point of being too reliant on it, which we're not, but also understanding, can we keep the balance so going forward, there won't be like there was 22 of the other 25 years where residential is absorbing so much more that people say, wait, why isn't it 3% this year? Why is it a larger percentage than that? And on the one hand, it's good, your home value is going up. The problem is it's going up larger than commercial and industrial, and that's hard to explain to people, but that is one of the reasons why it's so important that this has happened in part of our strategy. But what is that balance, right? And so that's an area that we need to continue to look at, but that was an important point. Teresa, you had talked about this, and Kevin, you talked about it earlier, with 114 communities since 2021, or 2022, excuse me, have sought overrides. ARPA, one of the smart things that we did was expended on non-recurring expenses, except in limited circumstances, which constitute the FTEs this year, which was very minimal, but we did not put it towards recurring expenses. Boston, Worcester, other communities really faced that challenge and had deficits where that's not, the dollars, once they're expended, they're gone. That did benefit the taxpayers. That was important for us to do that, particularly in recreation, sewer and water, areas that should have been done, that may never have been done, but post you know, the pandemic, we saw so much value in our community for passive recreation that we wanted to create or meet that demand to the extent we could. So that's important. A couple strategic questions. In terms of looking at our budget, what didn't make it? So we have the list of FTEs, but what in that list, or when we did fiscal projection, one didn't make it that could create the risk longer term? Because one thing that we used to do, and we're not doing now, when we were revenue-based and not expense-based, is that we'd kick the can. Okay, we've been good about that, but the risk we run over the next few years at 3.46% is that, does this list grow bigger? Or is it a snowball effect? Is there a position or two, if we spent it today, that years 2 through 5 we're going to expend lower dollars? What was the biggest risk here throughout this that is related to, Carlos, to what you asked about, but that would create larger risk long term? Or is that by either initial or next meeting, just, are there areas that the consequence of this will be 1.5 times, 2 times? And that, more strategically, in terms of longer term, as part of, Kevin, your goals in phase 3, looking at regionalization, shared services, I think that's gonna exact some savings. I think there is gonna be a point, we're gonna have to look at everything we do, and can we continue to do it as well? I think that's gonna, efficiencies are gonna create so much, but at 3.4%, 3.46%, years 4, year 5, there could be that point where we're still gonna be compressed. So it's just something as part of the equation every year we should look at. So stacking what we do, it's still services, I'm not saying we take anything off, but there are gonna be only so many efficiencies we can get through technology. Sure, AI, untapped. But right now, it's looking at efficiencies, but understanding there's still a finite amount of resources that will extract leverage for a while, but there will be a point where we need to continuously look at what we do, and can we do it?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. There's some things that we will explore with the $250,000. We're having trouble overcoming some hurdles to allow us to really implement things, like how do we break away from the current model that's really FTE based and build the new model while continuing to operate today. But I mean, if I look at this list, some of my initial reactions, the biggest risk that lies in those drivers where we have historical understaffing, or creating departments that, should have been created maybe, 20 years ago, because we're kind of behind the 8 ball already. So, I mean, I know it's low hanging fruit, but that's like fire, right? Like one of the vast majority of that request is a full-time position that's dedicated to fire inspections, right? This
Yeah.
is, we've done a lot of staffing, but we need to improve our processes for fire inspections, bring continuity to that. So that's, it's on paper a nice to have because it's not fire, it's not fire suppression, right? We're good there, but it will vastly improve public safety throughout the community by adding a position like that. Police very similarly too, right? As the region grows, like Shrewsbury could stand still with population, but as the region grows around us, we have 290, we have Route 20, we have Route 9, we're not isolated. We need to be able to respond to calls, and the police department's getting to 50,000 calls, over 50,000 calls a year. So that's risk in the context that you placed it, because the investment that we make today, that we don't make today, does in some way get exacerbated in future years.
Okay. Appreciate that. Okay. I mean, it's something that we, during this process in future years as well, continue to look at as part of what gets funded, what doesn't, and the opportunity cost of not doing it. And didn't relate it to personnel too. For a while, we were struggling filling positions because of competitiveness, and I know that we have a great team, professional approach, modernized our pay structure. Are we seeing our voluntary turnover ratio coming down as part of this? Now all stakeholders are involved. They're part of the goal-setting process. They're seeing it through. Their voices are heard. Are we starting to see results from that as well?
Yes, the data itself does show that voluntary turnover is reducing year over year. This budget does provide a performance incentive pool on top of a 2% cost of living adjustment. We all know 2% of cost of living is a light adjustment, looking at the overall economic picture, but those things are budgeted, and we feel that we can make meaningful adjustments to employees' salaries to stay competitive as an employer in the region. We'll have real data during the Finance Committee public hearings about those turnover rates and things like that, but it is dropping. We are also seeing good candidate pools when we have openings. So, indicating that at least our offerings are competitive in the marketplace.
And throw in the thoughtful benefit of paid family medical leave as well. It reflects the realities of the private sector as well. Okay. It's, all right. No, it's good to hear. It's good to hear. That's it. Any other questions or comments? Anything else? That's nice.
Yeah.
No?
More of that.
What's the next step? So thank you for your presentation. A lot of great detail, lot to digest. Ideally, we could, I know we post our meeting on YouTube, but to take out this particular section as well, your presentation in particular, for viewers to watch, so they don't have to go through, as well as we could put that and post that. So it's just a budget viewing that folks could watch at home, make it as easy as possible, understanding it's not easy. And there are a lot of variables to this, and oh, by the way, the subset is the school budget, you gotta figure out how that fits here, and there are a lot of details, but what are the next steps now? Immediate next steps.
I have a finance committee meeting to review the budget fiscal projection 1 as well this Thursday. And then the hearing dates are,
Yep, so the
March-
finance
yep.
committee will have public hearings on Thursday, March 20th, beginning at 6 p.m. And those will continue on Saturday, March 22nd at 8:30 a.m. And that will cover every town department as well as the school. They will all be here presenting. We will have a full schedule published well in advance of that meeting of what departments are going which day and at what time, so people can tune into all or as many as they'd like.
Kevin's contact information is included in the budget book, and ours is also available online, so we do encourage people emailing us if they have questions. We can help provide any context and guidance anytime throughout this process.
And there are opportunities, you had office hours tonight.
Correct.
That our second Tuesday meeting of the month, you hold office hours, but as well as any questions could come to us during our office hours. So other opportunities to ask questions off camera. Finance committee is public hearings, people can ask questions as well during that period of time, but want to make sure that anyone who asks questions can have them asked and answered in various forms so they can do it and be comfortable. Okay, good, thank you. Anything else with this? It's a good job, thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much.